All right, so let me just, oops. Adjust this a little bit. There we go. Good, okay. And after I was put out of Carlisle prison, I was moved to go to Priest Wilkinson's steeple house again, and was in the steeple house before him. And when he came in, I was declaring the truth to the people. And we had a meeting hard by where one Thomas Stubbs was declaring the word of life. So there were not many people in the steeple house, for the best and most of his hearers were turned to Christ's free teaching. The priest came in and opposed me, and there did we stay all the day, for when I began, he opposed me, and so if any law was broken, he brake it, for he thought to have wearied me out. And he shamed when his people were hauling me out. Is that how we pronounce it, hauling or hailing? Hauling, not sure.
Well, it means hauling, we determined.
Hauling? Okay, right, thanks, Madeline. Hauling me out, that we might see his fruits which Christ spoke of. They shall haul you out of the synagogues, and then they would leave me alone. There did he stand till it was most night, jangling and opposing of me, and would not go to his dinner. But at last the Lord's power and truth came so over him that he packed away with his people. And so the Lord's power and truth came over them all. And after I went to friends that were turned to the Lord into their meeting. And about this time, many of the steeple houses were empty, for such multitudes of people came to Christ's free teaching and knew their bodies the temples of God.
David?
Well, there's a word there, a verb that we usually don't see, but that I'm fascinated with, the word jangling. Sentence, there did he stand till it was most night, jangling and opposing of me. And my sense is that it would be similar to the expressions of the ranters, just a lot of noise and argumentation and self-centered speaking, not really serious discourse. I wonder if others see it either in that way or some different way.
Let's hear from Barbara.
I think jangling is a great word. I really like it because to me it conveys sort of this useless, not very significant noise, as David said, and also conveys to me that this guy might have just been quite nervously moving around and feeling jangled himself. I think it's a great word. I'm going to adopt it.
Mabin?
Yeah, I was going to say, when you think of jangling, you think of like keys jangling, and it really does seem to imply um making sound without any purpose. So it's just like, you're full of hot air and you're just mad about it and making a bunch of noise about it, but you really have no purpose or no higher intention other than to just be annoying.
And over to Bev.
Well, I think it's a wonderful word too. And I looked up the meaning, and these are three of them: to make a harsh metallic sound, to make a harsh discordant sound, to have an irritating effect on. So it's perfect. Now I'm wondering, what is Mr. Bojangles all about?
Thank you, Bev. And let's hear from Lynn.
Friend, thou doth jangle. Can you imagine saying that? But you can think it.
Thanks, Lynn. And over to Ginny.
I just love the irony of the priest thinking that he can weary out George Fox. And yet, after he listens to himself for long enough, he's pretty weary too. And that's when the Lord's power comes over him.
I'll make a comment and then over to Bev. Jangling makes me think about how there's so much noise in the airwaves of our world. And I love the movement of this particular section, jangling, but at last the Lord's power and truth came over him. That sense of peace and centering and contentment there. I love that movement. Bev?
It just reminds me that the actual sound of words is so important in like the breath is the soul, the same word in Hebrew, and they both have this open sound. Like breath is ruach or rauch, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, that the sounds in the original Aramaic that the Bible had, the actual sounds were so important to the meaning. And jangling is so descriptive of, you can discern what he's talking about has no meaning because the words are just not connected. I don't know how else to say, but I'm sure you understand what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Reminds me of 1 Corinthians 12 and 13, where if we speak or we have all knowledge or do all kinds of good things, but we don't have the love of God flowing to us, through us to others, then it's just a clanging cymbal. Some versions translated as, this is the jangling, and there's no love, there's no spirit behind it. It's just an empty words because it's just man's thinking instead of the deeper things of the spirit.
Ruth?
Yeah, must be that he had the grace, this man, Wilkinson, that you know, the Lord called Fox there again, you know. It says again, you know, it sounds like this guy he's going to be toppled over by the Lord. It sounds like, you know, he's quite, like, it's interesting, you know, straight out of prison, he went straight there. So, and then it just all went quiet afterwards, didn't it? After all the jangling. The truth came so over him. And yeah, so yeah, it's great how God desires those that you think wouldn't be able to be turned, that we see them being turned, despite them not even wanting to, despite them protesting and trying not to submit their wills. It feels like in the end he had no choice but to surrender. I'm not sure if that's the case, but that it just seems like that.
Beth?
I just find it so amazing and overwhelming, you know, that Ruth found that little word again, and it means so much. It was like this for me connects to synchronicity and how all things are meant to be. I mean, we have free will, but George Fox did what he was led to do, and he didn't argue with it, and he didn't stop it from coming in, and he knew that's where he had to go again. And that one little word again is so powerful. You know, that's the teaching for me, is what you have this internal direction to do, to follow through on it and to know where it's coming from. And it so connects to the sense of synchronicity, that things happen because this happened, because that happened. And I just am blown away. And I'm so glad that Ruth pointed out that little word again. It's lovely.
That reminds me that some were talking about following the example of Christ. And it's not following the example of everything little thing that he did. For example, we don't all get sandals and robes and go out in the desert and appoint 12 apostles. That's not how it's done. It's not what he did. The example that he exampled for us, he showed for us, was being moved by the Spirit. Not to say anything that Spirit wasn't already saying, and not to do anything that he didn't see Abba doing in the Spirit. And so the example that he set for us is to live by the Spirit, and that was what he encouraged, commanded people to do, live by the Spirit.
Barbara?
Donna, I should have said this earlier because I need you to scroll back up a little bit.
Okay.
And I have this worry that maybe we talked about this last time and I've forgotten, but I don't really quite understand the sentence about, and he, referring to the priest, and he shamed when his people were hailing me out, that we might see his fruits, which Christ spoke of. They shall hail you out of the synagogues, and then they would leave me alone. So I'm not quite sure what was happening there. Was this the priest was railing at George Fox some more? So I know that we talked about this before and I've just forgotten what that whole sentence is telling us was happening.
Thank you, Barbara.
Were you speaking to that, David?
No, I had a different comment. Let's stick with this one.
If I put the word he shamed himself when his people were hailing me out, that probably would make it a lot clearer if Fox would have done that. Fox really connected the behavior of the followers to the leader of the church. Whenever and you see this over and over again, I think in the journal, where he says, this is the fruit of the priest's preaching. And so the activity, the hearts and the actions of the people that are in that system reflect that system and bring shame to the people that are running that system, especially the priest. That's my interpretation anyway.
Okay, that's helpful.
David?
Well, it relates to what I was going to point out, the very last sentence. Maybe you could scroll down to that. Yes. Let's see. Yes, Christ's free teaching. I think this is emphasizing that the teaching and preaching that Jesus and his disciples did and that friends are doing was not for hire. It was outside of the tithes system, which paid the salaries of what friends rather scornfully called the hireling priests. And the metaphor there is that if shepherds in the field couldn't be with their sheep, they would hire somebody else. So that's literally what a hireling was, but the sheep did not know the voice of the hireling, only the true shepherd. So I just find a lot in that phrase, Christ's free teaching. Quakers were quite happy to identify with that in a polemic attack on the church, I'll call it patronage system. You know, you got better paying parishes, the more highly connected you were politically, or the more bribes you paid. So.
Thank you. The very end of this sentence struck me again this time. Knew their bodies, the temples of God. And what struck me, I think last time and this time, was the emphasis that we have of an experiential faith, something that we can know in our bodies. And that's meaningful for me. I was talking to a friend this last week and she made a very simple comment, and I think I had said to her something about that I really appreciate the creativity of people, and I think I was thinking about it in the artistic realm. And she said, and there are many people who don't see that as God's gift. And I felt viscerally in my body, I felt a little shifting. And I said to her, this is what I call my God sparkle. When something impacts me and it's in my body, I can feel it. Are we ready to move on to 206? Okay. Lynn, would you be in a position to read?
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. And so, after the great meeting in Cumberland, as aforesaid, I passed out of Cumberland through the countries where I had great meetings with friends and of the world's people. And I established them upon Christ, the rock and foundation of the true prophets and apostles, but not of the false. And after I came out of Carlisle prison aforesaid, I went into the abbey chamber. And there came in a mad woman that sometimes was very desperate. And she fell down of her knees and cried, "Put off your hats, for grace, grace hangs about thy neck." And so the Lord's power run through her, that she was sensible of condition, and after came and confessed it to friends.
Thank you, Lynn. Let's hear from Bev.
I'm wondering if someone can elaborate on the world's people.
David?
Well, I think it simply means those who were not part of the Quaker movement. Obviously, friends lived in the world, but there is a distinction between being in the world and of the world. So I just think it means the non-Quakers, those who have not been exposed to or come around to, converted to the truth.
Bev?
That's very helpful because I see of the world's people, I see any human being that isn't in some way connected and knows that they're loved by the divine as having bought into the cult of society that we've all been trained in since birth. And yeah, it's very much like of the world. People who are of the world, to me, are people who don't see that what they think is the truth in our world that society says is really just the opposite. And in some scriptures and writings, the phrase that you're dead when you're just living a life unconnected to the earth and to the divine, you're dead because you're not who you really are. That was very helpful, David. Thank you.
I'm intrigued by this section about put off your hats, for grace, grace hangs about thy neck. And I know that there's a lot of symbolism around wearing a hat in different times of history, and I'm not sure how that might connect with this, but this particular sentence gives me a sense of that taking off your hat means that you are totally open to receive from God and God's grace. You don't have a hat there that's protecting you or shielding you. You're open, available. Mabin?
I know one of the earliest trends of the Quakers, they would refuse to doff their hat to people. You know, even if someone of a higher class came past them, or like a judge or a landed gentry or something like that, they wouldn't take off their hat as a sign of respect. And it seems to me it's saying that, like, he's saying that take off your hat, for grace hangs about thy neck. So it's like the only person worth taking your hat off to is Christ, because he offers us grace.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And Barbara?
But isn't this the mad woman who's saying this? And I have sort of a follow-up question to Maiden, like, well, sorry. When friends would speak in a meeting, did they take their hats off then? So was this the mad woman saying, take off your hat because you've got God's grace coming through you? No, I'm surprised it's the mad woman saying it.
The next line, it says, "So the Lord's power run through her, that she was sensible of her condition, and after came and confessed it to friends." It sounds like, saying George Fox came out of Carlisle prison and the mad woman came up and said this. It's like the mad woman saw Fox and was convinced in her heart just by seeing him come out of the prison or something. And she said these words that related to Quaker spirituality. And then after they talked, she was convinced and became a friend.
Bev, is your comment related to this as well? Okay, Bev?
I think all through history, when someone didn't fit into society, they saw the truth, perhaps, they were considered mad. And I can relate to that. So what am I trying to say? It's just like, and it happens here too, but they used to say in Russia, if you didn't fit in, then you were thrown, and you didn't accept the communist point of view, then you were either thrown into jail or into an asylum. And that happens all the time, everywhere. So this idea, and especially now that I'm doing internal family systems, a mad person is just someone that doesn't fit into our society. And in indigenous societies, those people were often seen as shamans, that they're seeing the truth, but other people can't accept it. So I think for me, it's like this woman found a place where she could be real. And and whatever she was saying came from deep within her. I don't really understand what she's trying to say about the hats. Something about the grace being around her neck is like this particular chakra, your speaking voice. But I just have a lot of respect for her.
Thanks, Bev. And over to David.
Well, what occurs to me is very similar to what Bev has just shared. It's so easy for people to just be shoved into pigeonholes and the rather rude categories that society assigns to some people. Okay, so in her community, she was known as the crazy lady. But that didn't mean that she wasn't able to perceive the truth and the healing. And as this report says, the power of the Lord running through her. At that point, she became aware of her disability, sensible of her condition. But it's not stopping her from being a witness to the truth and the work of God in that community and through George Fox. I'm remembering, the first week or two that I was working for American Friends Service Committee. I'd been hired as a peace education secretary in the Chicago regional office, 1967. And our executive secretary did some wonderful tutoring to me about Friends' traditions and ways. I had worshipped a few times among Friends, but I wasn't immersed in that culture. But my boss, my senior colleague, said, David, Friends never write off anyone. Ooh, that was an eye-opener for me, because there's a lot of people I really didn't want to be bothered with. I wanted to write them off. They weren't from my point of view, or my people, my party, whatever it was. So that's really a liberating concept. It's a challenging one, because if we don't write off anyone, we have to be open in our hearts and minds to their gifts and the truth that they may be bearing witness to. So I really see a lot packed into this paragraph, and I want to learn from it.
Let's hear from Lynn.
I wanted to say that I'm grateful that in this group we can accept Fox's commitment to Christ without rejecting it or writing off those amongst us who might be professing Christians. David said we never write off anyone, but we do tend to silence people who are professing Christians. I think some in this group are, not all are. I don't consider myself one, but I have to say I have great gratitude that we can talk here about Christ and the Bible openly and consider both resources for learning. It's been quite transformative for me to have this ease of discussion, and I lament the changes in our meetings that do not any longer really support this kind of discussion of God or Christ or the Bible. They've been kind of censored out, and I feel that we're the lesser for it. And also, as David said, we're never to write anybody off, but in a sense, we've written the history of Quakerism off.
Thank you, Lynn. And over to Mabon.
Really, in response to what Lynn was saying, I don't know if you've ever attended a conservative friends meeting. I visited one in North Carolina last year, and they have a kind of like this. It's every other week. They have a Bible study from a Quaker perspective, and as someone whose local friends meeting is liberal and many people are not Christian, I consider myself to be one. Just attending that Bible study with other Quakers and discussing it from a Quaker perspective is very refreshing. And I don't know if there might be a Quaker Bible study around where you're at, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to send you the link to the one and Friendship Friends meeting in North Carolina.
Sure,
I'd love
thank
that
you.
link.
Can you put it in the chat?
Sure, one moment. Let me go copy it.
Thank you, Mabon. And Lynn, did you have more to say?
Thank you, Donna. No, I'm done. Thank you.
Yeah, I could. Oh, sorry, I should put my hand up.
Ruth?
Thanks, Ruth.
Yeah, I just want to express my gratitude for North Carolina and Ohio conservative meetings, because it's really fed my soul. I live so far away from the US, but there are two meetings that are still in the old way of worshipping. Is like a huge freedom song for me, and when I was like despairing and thinking religious society friends is dead, in my country, God led me there, and I'm so glad. So I would definitely recommend anyone to dip in to the worship there and see what it brings out of you.
I just sent the Zoom link. Hopefully that will work. It's the second and fourth Thursdays of every month at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
Thank you, Mabon. Any further comments about this section? Elise?
Yeah, I've really been thinking about the statement, friends will never write off anyone, because it is not true to my experience. And but it comes from a very deep place. And I think that as much as people are in the Lord's power and truth, and recognize that, and as was in one of the paragraph at the top of the page, they know their bodies the temples of God. They're established upon Christ, the rock and the foundation. From that place can come the welcoming of other people, and to see them with eyes that are not the world's eyes. But when we don't have those connections, when we don't, which I find among, I find this to be true, this lack to be true among liberal East Coast friends in the United States, then where does it come from? Then it's coming from our own desire to be welcoming, to be not to write anybody off, to try to listen, but on our own selves, by our own selves, we can't do that. And in fact, when that's the position that we put ourselves in, I think that's when we don't do it. When we have just fallen asleep to this connection with Christ. I'm not sure that that word is important. It's important to me, but the drift into secularism is makes us not realize that God acts through us, and that we are to be still and listen. And so, as much as we may want to be welcoming and to not write anybody off, on our own we can't do that, and we don't. When we are in that place of separate.
Thank you, Elise. And let's hear from Bev.
I just wanted to say, for me, where this discussion has gone is that I go to other groups as well, where people are in that space, that silence. And for me, the words are very powerful, but they ultimately don't matter. Whether someone says it's in Christ or in Buddha or in the divine or whatever words they're using, it's like they're talking about the same thing. It's the way I hear it. And I so appreciate in the Quaker communities that I've participated in worship that I think people are quite aware when it's presence, when their presence is there. And that's always loving and connected to everyone. And it doesn't matter what the words are. For me, when I react, I know it's coming from my worldly, physical, emotional self that has a lot of burdens on it. And I know that kind of fear of someone or anger at someone or in some way not accepting another person is coming from those parts and has nothing to do with that part that's connected to the divine.
Right.
So I'm not sure what I'm trying to say, but I appreciate being in any space where people are present when they're just being, and it is such a privilege to be in those spaces with others. It's very supportive.
if everyone has that of God within them and is part of them, how could we ever give up on them? Even if they're beyond human abilities to heal, God still can. For me personally, this really strikes home because of, you know, the idea of narcissism and narcissists in our culture today. And I do kind of put them in a category that seems to be beyond human ability to help. But I don't give up on them in that I know that God could heal them. And I look forward to that day.
I was in a yoga class earlier this week on my mat waiting for the class to start. And I thought of the expression, seeing that of God in everyone you meet. And I looked around the room, and the room just became charged with so much beauty. It was just quite incredible. Bev, have I missed your hand? No. Okay. Are we ready to move on to 207? Is that all right with everyone?
Yes.
Thank you, Barbara. Barbara, would you be in a position to read this section?
Okay. Let me know, though, if I'm not loud enough. And I came to another place in Cumberland where a man's wife was distracted and very desperate, attempting at times to kill her children and her husband. But I was moved of the Lord God to speak to her, and she kneeled down of her bare knees and cried, and said she would walk of her bare knees if she might go with me. And the Lord's power wrought through her, and she went home well. And in Bishopric, while I was there, they brought a woman tied behind a man that could neither eat nor speak, and had been so a great while. And they brought her into the house to me, to Anthony Pearson's. And I was moved of the Lord God to speak to her, so that she ate and spake and was well, and got up behind her husband without any help, and went away well.
Thank you, Barbara. Let's hear from David.
Well, these are rather dramatic encounters and reports. One might be tempted to think either or both two things. One is that Fox is boasting, calling attention to his own healing power, which is not the case because he says that it's the power of the Lord. And the other temptation is to think, okay, so that's what they did back then, but certainly we don't have that power. And I would urge us to be cautious of jumping to that conclusion. I think what has happened here, he doesn't describe a whole lot of detail, but I think the fact that Fox took these two, we would say, mentally ill people or having some kind of mental impairment or disability, that he took them seriously. He spent time with them, probably sat and looked them right in the eye with compassion and caring and unhurried and not expecting anything in return. I think that when that kind of totally loving care is shared by us, or I would actually say through us, because it's a gift of the Spirit for which we may be vessels. When that happens, there can be healing that we might call miraculous, but really is part of the greater universal order of goodness and love. And it's restorative. I've probably said here some other times that a great discovery in recent years, as I've done some Bible study with those who understand Greek, is that the word often, usually translated into English as savior or salvation, soter, is just as readily translated as healer or healing. So if I say that the living Christ is my soter, say my healer, the one who cares for my body and soul, and it's a here and now thing. It's not, do we have a ticket to heaven after we've died? No, that kind of healing can happen when people encounter the least of these, quote unquote. And to repeat what we said before, don't write them off. Don't stick them in a pigeonhole, say they're hopeless, nothing I can do. You just never know. If we endeavor, as Penn says, let us see what love can do. I think we're seeing two examples here of what love can do in healing people of some very distressing and dangerous and certainly antisocial conditions. He went away well. That's the last words in each of these paragraphs. She went home well. Let us see what love can do.
Thank you, David. Let's hear from Beth.
For me, this is the way life would be if we had a healthy society. It was interesting that in the Middle Ages, the church had to get rid of all the healers. And I was quite shocked when I learned more recently that a lot of the women were killed as witches because they healed miraculously. So you were gone no matter what, because that was unacceptable, that we could heal each other, that we're all equals, that we're all connected. And, you know, my own experience, just as a simple example, is I used to have migraines all the time from when I was a baby. They're very rare now. And I remember on a couple of occasions going to the symphony in Toronto, Massey Hall or Roy Thompson Hall, going with a migraine and sitting through a couple classical pieces, and it was gone. I remember coming home with a migraine, and my grandmother was living with us, and she did a Jewish healing kind of practice, like a shaman, and I was better. But modern medicine can't have these other ways of healing existing. It's in Ayurvedic medicine, in Chinese medicine, in so many other healing arts where you look at things very differently than just the physical, and they work. I don't think George Fox was alone in doing this. All of the great teachers that were connected most of the time were able to heal others. And today we have that in Gabor Mate, in Richard Schwartz, in Thomas Hubel, in all these teachers that have connected the spiritual to the psychological and the physical. And we can heal, especially in community with others. And this seems quite natural to me, but we've been taught in society that, this is weird stuff. And I always say whatever we're taught in society is the right way is probably the wrong way. And we need to be, as I can't remember his last name, said, we need to be fugitives. We are fugitives from this society. Anyway, I think this is quite wonderful, and I accept it because I know it's true, because it's been true for me.
Mavin shared in the text in chat that this section isn't even in his version of the journal, and it's very true because some editors thought putting miraculous kind of healings in would alienate people from Quakers. Quakers were barely tolerated at one point, but before that they were persecuted quite heavily. And so put anything that would distinguish them from Anglican Christianity at the time would cause more persecution. And so some people in their infinite wisdom edited out anything that might seem that way, any prophecies or any healings or anything supernatural that they didn't understand.
Yeah, I just learned this for the first time last October when I was in North Carolina. I was talking to Max Carter and Lloyd Lee Wilson about Quaker history and spirituality, and we got to talking about the journal, and I was so surprised that they removed it. It's just like it may be difficult to understand, but and even if modern Quakers don't believe in it, you're taking away an important part of the journal. And I mean, it'd be like removing the miracles of Jesus in the Bible because it makes people uncomfortable, you know?
Early friends always believed in continuing revelation. God still speaks and moves. What a countervailing motion within religion often is that God doesn't anymore. He only speaks to the Bible, some believe and affirm. and they persecute anyone who has that connection with God. And they call them crazy and mad and so forth. And they want to lock them up and shut them up, just like they did Jesus. And even the Jews wanted to stone Jesus because he called God Father and said he and that Father and I are one, and various other things. As soon as these words came out of his mouth, there were crowds there that wanted to stone him to death. And even when the Gospels were written, I think there was still some of this sentiment that was quite around. And so you have people editing themselves sometimes even, and not saying things quite directly. And then other people complain, well, why doesn't he say it directly? It's like, well, every time he did, people would pick up stones. So even in the 1600s or 1700s, by when people are editing Fox's journal, they're cutting out, they're wanting to cut out parts because they're not socially or it's acceptable to the religious system as well, and would cause more persecution.
Shall we move on to 208? All right. Ginny, would you be in a position of reading?
Certainly. And as I came out of Cumberland one time, I came to Hawkshead and lighted at a friend's house. And there was young Margaret Fell with me and William Caton. And it being a very cold season, we lighted, and the lass made us a fire, her master and dame being gone to the market. And there was a boy lying in the cradle, which they rocked, about 11 years old. He was grown almost double, and I cast my eye upon the boy, and seeing he was dirty, I bid the lass wash his face and his hands, and get him up and bring him to me. So she brought him to me, and I bid her take him and wash him again, for she had not washed him clean. Then I was moved of the Lord God to lay my hands upon him and speak to him, and so bid the lass take him again and put on his clothes. And after we passed away. And some time after, I called at the house, and I met his mother, but did not light. Oh, stay, says she, and have a meeting at our house, for all the country is convinced by the great miracle that was done by thee upon my son. For we had carried him to Wells and Bath, and all doctors had given him over, for his grandfather and father feared he would have died, and their name have gone out, having but that son. But presently, after you were gone, says she, We came home and found our son playing in the streets. Therefore, said she, all the country would come to hear if I would come back again and have a meeting there. And this was about 3 years after that she told me of it, and he was grown to be straight, full youth then. And so the Lord have the praise.
Thank you, Ginny. I see Ruth's hand. Ruth, over to you.
I expect that he wasn't aware that this had happened, you know. So maybe he was just as surprised and clear that it was the Lord that had done this. Which is encouraging as well to the ministers, encouraging sometimes when you hear things, you know, because you don't think, then you know how powerful the Lord is. So it's important. These signs are very important. They're physical manifestations of the Lord's power, and they're really significant and important.
Thank you, Ruth. And over to Bev.
What this means for me is that George Fox didn't have to do anything. He just was his being. And this for me reminds me that in worship, or when I'm with someone, usually on Zoom, and we're there together in a deep way, that presence is very healing. To be seen and heard at a very deep level and accepted is very healing. And he may not have known how it works. I don't know how it works, but I know being in people's presence, like today, is very healing for me.
I'm reminded of the biblical examples again of Jesus laying hands on people and speaking over them, the healing, and him saying that he was only saying what Abba gave him to say and what he saw Abba doing. And so there's power when Spirit moves us to do something. And even if it takes time for it to happen, I fully expect God to perform what he has said he's going to perform. The query this morning, one of my meetings was, what is the reason that you have faith? What brought you to faith? And for me, it's always been that direct experience of God, or however you might want to call it, spirit, where I heard the voice, and everything that the voice has ever told me to stay that inner teacher has always come true. Even if it wasn't manifest right away before my eyes. Some things were a whole decade before it even happened. Things that he's shown me to do and what would happen. And then they came to pass exactly as he had shown me. And so there's the direct experience of God that I wouldn't have come to faith without that direct experience, because I know there's lots of people who believe lots of things and they're very sincere in their belief, but that doesn't mean that what they believe is necessarily true. So I had to see and I had to hear, and I was doubting Chatty that had to put his fingers in Jesus' holes in his hands before he'd believe. But added to that is the 100% track record of everything that God has ever said to me has come true, except for maybe the first thing that hasn't come true yet. But all the other things have come true, so I believe that the first thing will come true as well. When we're moved by spirit to say or do something, is because spirit wants to effect a change of some kind. And whether we see the change ourselves or not, which it's usually quite gratifying to see the change, that's not our business. Our business is to do and to say. It's God's business to effect the changes that he wants to effect, and our job to be faithful to that call. And sometimes we have to pray for the courage to be faithful to that call, but it doesn't always look normal. And there might be pushback, and there might be persecution, and people might think you're weird. So yeah, sometimes we have to wait in God until he gives us the heart, the love that overcomes fear, that motivates us to follow along with his wisdom. A verse keeps coming back to me. God's word does not return void, which is a weird way of constructing a sentence, but people take it to mean that when God says and does something, then there's going to be a powerful effect. There's going to be a change. There's going to be a shift. And so we're following a wisdom that is greater than our own, much greater, and a love that is greater than my own. But when I do so, great things happen.